In the heart of New York on a dim, solitary night, we find a man sitting alone in a toll booth. It's his night job, and he's got a stern look on his face, seemingly unimpressed by his surroundings. The traffic, the city lights, all of it seems dull to him. He's either working or just trying to get through the night. As dawn breaks, his shift ends and he trudges home, his expression unchanged, as cold as ever. Once at home, he's met by his wife, who's prepared breakfast for him. Their conversation is just as chilly as his demeanor. She gently asks, "Henry, do you still love me?" And even though his response is a reassuring, "Of course I do," his face remains emotionless. Through their dialogue, we learn that his wife, Debbie, wants to have kids. However, Henry, despite adoring kids, doesn't seem to want any of his own. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted by the doorbell. Debbie isn't eager to see who's at the door because she's still waiting for a more satisfying answer. Henry opens the door to reveal Eddie, an old friend, and another man, Joe, who's not looking too well. They help Joe into the house. Eddie tells Henry that they were supposed to play a baseball game, but because Joe is sick, they're short a player. He asks Henry to step in, but the baseball game isn't what it seems. They head out, and on the way, Eddie asks Henry to stop by a bank ATM. They need money for beer, he says. Besides Eddie and Henry, there are two other guys with them. When they get to the bank, Eddie tells Henry to wait in the car with the engine running. As they drive off, Henry realizes that the car is hot-wired. This makes him think, did Eddie steal the car? Are they about to rob a bank? Sure enough, Eddie and his team stride into the bank, attempting to pull off a heist. But they're amateurs, and the security alarms sound off immediately. Staff at the bank start to panic, and as Henry's hot-wired car roars into life, a security guard pulls out his weapon. Henry, utterly clueless about what's transpiring, raises his hands in surrender. Poor, innocent Henry is now in custody for a crime he didn't even know he was part of. When the time comes for questioning, Henry doesn't rat out his supposed partners. Maybe he's fiercely loyal, or maybe Eddie's the only name he knows. Regardless, the next scene unfolds in a courtroom where the judge drops a 3-year sentence for robbery on Henry. The silent protagonist takes it all in stride. Whether he's living at home or behind bars, he seems to be unfazed. Curious to hear the rest of the story? Please subscribe, and now I'll tell what happened next. His new home is a cell he shares with Max Kahn, a man in his 50s who's comfortable in the prison environment. They strike up a conversation, and Max takes Henry under his wing, explaining the unspoken rules of the prison and introducing him to other inmates. During dinner on the first night, Max says something that makes Henry think. He talks about how the real crime is not pursuing your dreams. When he asks Henry about his dream, Henry seems unsure if he even has one. Max finds this strange and muses over what life would be like without dreams. You see, Max is a kind-hearted soul, and he starts to plant an idea in Henry's mind, an idea that could change his life. To fulfill your potential, you first need to have a dream. Fast forward 6 months, and we see Debbie visiting Henry in prison. Their interactions are still as icy as ever, but Debbie has news to share. She now wants to marry Joe. Remember him? The one who was sick at the beginning and involved in the heist. Hearing this, Henry simply smiles and wishes her well. Another year rolls by, and it appears that Henry has adjusted well to his life behind bars. Max, ever the raconteur, continues to entertain the other inmates with his stories as they go about their shaving routines. Meanwhile, Henry's beard has grown long, likely a sign of his sorrow over his wife's departure. But our guy Henry isn't one to hold grudges. The day comes when he's granted parole, but there's no joy on his face as he says his goodbyes to Max and leaves the prison. With no place in mind to go, he heads towards his old home, where he's greeted by Joe. Joe acts nonchalant, treating Henry like any other guest. Imagine that. Henry is now just a visitor in the home he once shared with Debbie. She serves him a beer, cool as a cucumber. Surprisingly, Debbie isn't pregnant, something that catches Henry off guard. Joe thanks him for not disclosing his identity during the investigation of the robbery. With a touch of cynicism, Henry admits he didn't even know Joe's real name. Now homeless and jobless, he remembers a piece of wisdom Max shared. If you're going to do the time, might as well commit the crime. So there he is, standing in front of the bank that got him in trouble. Suddenly, a car bumps into him, marking the entrance of Julie Ivanova, a local actress who's known for her commercials and currently acting in a play at a nearby theater. Julie is genuinely nice, and while she scolds Henry for standing in the way, she makes sure he's okay. She probably doesn't want any trouble. Frank, the security guard who arrested Henry, helps him up and remembers him as the guy who was implicated in the bank incident. Julie, taking pity on Henry, decides to buy him a coffee before heading off to her rehearsal. In the cafe, Henry recognizes Julie from her TV commercials. Frank seems changed from his earlier self, showing a bit more compassion now. Once Julie and Frank finish their coffees, Henry heads to the restroom. Inside, he spots an old news article on the wall, revealing that during the Prohibition era, there used to be a tunnel connecting the theater, where Julie and the others are rehearsing, to another place. Henry finds himself deep in thought, pondering over the newspaper in front of the bank. This is the moment when he decides it's time for him to commit the crime that landed him in prison in the first place. To kick things off, he visits Max in jail to share his newfound dream. Max is caught off guard and can't help but question the sanity of a dream that involves robbing a bank and talking about it in prison. He quickly dismisses the idea, stating that he views the prison as his home and isn't keen on leaving to pull off a heist. But Henry argues, expressing his unwillingness to spend his entire life in jail and die in despair. He goes on to persuade Max that he needs his help to break into the bank's vault. His convincing argument works, and the two friends find themselves living together in an apartment in Buffalo. They head back to the cafe where Henry saw the revealing newspaper article, realizing the map is outdated due to changes in the bank structure over the past 80 years. They decide to check out the bank and theater for confirmation. At the bank, Max's knack for deception aids in confirming that the old tunnel is still there. Next, they head to the theater, where Max pretends to be an old performer from 3 decades ago. With Julie's help, Max is given a full tour of the theater, where he speaks with a manager who knows about the tunnel. According to the manager, the tunnel is closed and currently serves as the dressing room for a performer named Lopachin. In the theater auditorium, Henry works up the courage to ask Julie out on a date. He tells her his story, and they set a date for Chinese food, marking the beginning of their romantic relationship. The date goes well, and it's clear that even our stoic protagonist Henry is starting to catch feelings for Julie. Max concludes that they need access to the dressing rooms, and he's willing to lend a hand. He even manages to convince one of the actors to step aside so Henry can join the performance. That's right, Henry is stepping into the spotlight. Our unassuming protagonist, Henry, now takes on the role of an actor in The Cherry Orchard, a play he's a part of for his plan to break into the bank vault. This decision involves convincing the harsh director who, throughout the story, spends a lot of his time criticizing Julie's acting skills, despite her charm. Max, confident in Henry's acting abilities, is certain that Henry can pull off playing the character of Lopakin with ease. Sure enough, Henry proves himself, exceeding expectations. Henry and Max finally break through the dressing room wall to access the hidden tunnel. The challenge they face, though, is that the tunnel is filled with sand and needs to be dug out. This requires an extra pair of hands, leading them to seek help from Joe, who they find drowning his sorrows in a bar, unhappy with his current job. Henry offers him a way out, roping him into their plan. As the trio embarks on their digging journey, Henry juggles rehearsals and the laborious tunnel work. All seems to be running smoothly until one night, they're caught off guard by Frank, who confesses to keeping a close eye on their movements near the bank. When they try to dismiss his suspicions, Frank lets them know he's onto their plan and wants in. He offers inside information about a one-time, multi-million-dollar cash exchange at the bank before his retirement. His desire to join the heist comes from a place of resentment toward the bank for denying his loan when his wife was ill, so they bring him on board. But the team isn't complete just yet. One night, a drunk Eddie barges in, expressing interest in joining but refusing to contribute to the digging. Max is furious, but they have no choice but to include him. Amidst all this, Julie storms out of a rehearsal, upset with the director's critique of her performance. Kind-hearted Henry rushes to console her, and in this tender moment, he reveals that he plans to leave on the opening night of the Cherry Orchard show. This leaves the play in a precarious position, as Henry has become a key figure in the production and it can't commence without him. As things take a turn, Julie becomes more upset. She expresses her anger at Henry and asks him to leave her be. Henry's plan involves breaking into the bank vault during the inaugural performance of the play. He'll manage the heist during the intermissions, all the while hoping that his absence goes unnoticed. Eddie plays a critical role here. He's responsible for using the welding tools to access the vault. Even though he's a bit of a troublemaker, Eddie is the only one who knows how to operate the necessary equipment to crack open the vault. With Eddie's help, they eventually make their way into the vault. Henry keeps himself updated about the progress in between his stage appearances. The cash is packed into bags and stowed away in the dressing room. However, in the midst of all this, the old reckless Eddie resurfaces. He threatens Max with a gun and instructs Joe to move the cash to the car. Eddie's plan is to make off with the money all by himself. But Max, our savvy con man, doesn't let that happen. He throws a punch that lands Eddie on the floor. With the cash safely loaded into the car, they make their getaway. However, midway, Henry asks the driver to stop. He needs a moment to think. A realization washes over him about how much he is leaving behind, particularly Julie, the woman he has fallen for. He races back to the theater, where Julie is in the middle of her performance in the Cherry Orchard. In the final scene, Max bursts in, declaring his everlasting love for Julie and asking her to join him in Moscow. They share a final, passionate kiss, bringing an end to their story. The theme of this narrative is deeply emotional. It's about the connection between feelings and self-discovery. Initially, Henry was stuck in a joyless marriage, feeling lost and aimless. Then he felt a sudden urge to commit a crime, perhaps for the thrill of it. He's a risk taker. Meeting Julie sparked emotions in him, which brought a new perspective to his life. As Julie believes, the play they are a part of is about leaving the past behind and starting anew in order to truly live. Henry plans to do just that, starting a fresh chapter of his life with Julie. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and let me know in the comments what you think of the ending of this movie. I guess YouTube didn't show you my other videos. Here are two I think you'll definitely like. So take your pick and watch.